I want you to just imagine a scientist standing in the laboratory, and they're surrounded by all this, complex, really imposing analytical equipment.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. But now I want you to look closer at this researcher's hands because they are heavily swollen. I mean, the joints are just entirely distorted, inflamed and altered by severe rheumatoid arthritis.
Oh, wow. That sounds incredibly painful.
It is. The physical reality of this disease for the scientists means they literally cannot pinch or grip the main power switch on the laboratory's X-ray machinery. Just turning the machine on is, an agonizing impossibility.
Right. So basically a career ender for an experimental scientist.
Exactly. Or it should be. But instead of abandoning the work, this scientist actually designs a system of custom-built elongated levers, and she has them physically strapped to the dials and switches of the machinery.
Wait, strapped to the dial, like physical extensions.
Yeah, literally physical extensions.
Yeah.
With these modified levers, those twisted hands can push down with enough leverage to power up the beam. And with that very machine, those crippled hands somehow manage to map out the invisible, three-dimensional architecture of the most complex, life-saving molecules on planet Earth.
It's an incredible image. And, those hands belong to Dorothy Hodgkin.
Right. And we are doing a deep dive into her life today because she is just fascinating.
She really is. And while her name might not echo in popular culture the way, say, Einstein or Curie does, the legacy of her intellect is literally coursing through your veins or the veins of someone you love right now.
Seriously. We're talking about molecules that changed everything.
Exactly. If you have ever been prescribed penicillin to fight off a bacterial infection, right, or taken vitamin B12 for anemia, or if you've relied on synthesized insulin to manage diabetes, you are intimately benefiting from her relentless drive.
Because she basically figured out what those things actually looked like, right?
Yeah, she dedicated her life to figuring out exactly how the atoms inside these vital molecules were arranged, which is the absolute prerequisite for mass producing them and ultimately saving millions of lives.
And she accomplished all of this while navigating a physical deterioration that, like we said, would have sidelined almost anyone else. She remains the only British woman to ever win a Nobel Prize in any of the sciences.
Which is wild to think about, just the only one.
Right, and she achieved this while deeply embedded in international peace movements and, honestly, highly controversial Cold War politics. But to really grasp the magnitude of what she did, our mission today is to understand the sheer mind-bending difficulty of her chosen field.
Oh, yeah. X-ray crystallography.
Yeah, which it can sound impossibly abstract, right? So let's ground it. I like to picture walking into a pitch-black ballroom.
Okay, I'm with you.
And suspended from the ceiling is this massive, highly elaborate crystal chandelier. But here's the catch. It is completely invisible.
Completely invisible. That makes things difficult.
Right. You can't see it and you can't reach out and touch it. The only tool you are given is a flashlight. So you stand back and you shine your beam into the dark where you assume the chandelier is hanging.
And the light hits it.
Exactly. The light hits the invisible glass, it refracts and scatters, and it projects thousands of tiny glowing dots onto the wall behind it.
Okay.
Your task is to look purely at that random scattering of dots on the wall, measuring the exact distance between them and their relative brightness, and from that data alone, mathematically reverse engineer the precise size, shape, and 3D placement of every single piece of glass in that invisible chandelier.
That is, it's a puzzle of epic proportions.
Yeah.
And the chandelier analogy gets you halfway there, right?
Yeah.
But let's add the physical reality of the subatomic world.
Yeah, make it harder.
Way harder. In Hodgkin's laboratory, the chandelier is a single microscopic molecule. The pieces of glass are individual atoms, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen. And your flashlight is a concentrated beam of X-rays.
So you're firing radiation at it.
Right. And when those X-rays pass through a crystallized version of the molecule, they don't just bounce off. They interact with the electron clouds surrounding each atom.
Right, because crystals are orderly.
Exactly. Because atoms in a crystal are arranged in highly ordered, repeating lattices, the X-rays diffract. They scatter in very specific, predictable angles based on a principle called Bragg's law.
Okay, so it's not totally random, there's a rule to it.
There is a rule, and that scattered radiation is captured on photographic film behind the crystal. It appears as this constellation of dark spots. The density of the spots tells you the amplitude of the wave, and the position tells you the angle.
So you're just looking at little black dots on a film.
That's it. And from there, you have to run incredibly dense, just punishing mathematical calculations to work backward to the three-dimensional atomic structure. It is a puzzle that requires a brain fundamentally wired to see hidden patterns.
Which really begs the question, right? How does a mind develop that specific spatial capability? Because she wasn't born in an Oxford laboratory.
No, she wasn't. Dorothy Mary Crowfoot was born in Cairo, Egypt, actually, in 1910.
Okay, so quite a ways from Oxford.
Definitely. Her parents, John and Grace Mary, who went by Molly 8, they were archaeologists and colonial administrators. So her childhood was geographically fractured right from the start. They lived in Cairo during the winter and returned to England in the summer.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of travel for a young kid in the 1910s.
It was. But then the outbreak of World War I in 1914 shattered that routine entirely. Her mother brought 4-year-old Dorothy and her 2 infant sisters back to the UK to live with her grandparents. And then, surprisingly, she immediately returned to her husband in the Middle East.
Wait, she left the kids in the UK?
Yeah. So Dorothy spent a massive portion of her formative years separated from her parents.
That's gotta leave a mark. I mean, dealing with that kind of separation at 4 years old.
Absolutely. That separation, compounded by just the sheer trauma of the era, left an indelible mark. I mean, her mother lost 4 of her own brothers in the trenches of World War I.
Oh my God. 4 brothers, that is devastating.
Total profound familial devastation. And that forged Molly into an uncompromising advocate for the League of Nations and global cooperation. But even from a continent away, Molly was cultivating Dorothy's intellect and her political awareness.
So she was still highly involved in her education.
Very much so. Molly was a proficient botanist herself, actually. And she encouraged Dorothy's early fascination with the natural world.
Like collecting rocks and things.
Exactly. By the time Dorothy was 10, she was obsessively studying crystals. Her mother actually bought her a portable mineral analysis kit so she could chemically test pebbles she found in local streams.
A portable chemistry kit at 10. That's amazing.
Right. And then came the definitive spark. On Dorothy's 16th birthday, her mother gifted her a book by W.H. Bragg, the pioneer of X-ray crystallography, titled Concerning the Nature of Things.
Okay, think about the typical 16-year-old for a second. You hand them a dense, highly technical textbook on X-ray diffraction, and, I mean, you'd expect them to use it as a doorstop.
Yeah, most kids would toss it in a corner.
Right. But Dorothy read it and essentially decided on her life's work right there. But there is a crucial detour in her late teens that I think is the actual key to her later genius.
Oh, you mean the trip to Jordan?
Yes. In 1928, before she formally commits to chemistry, she travels to Jerash, in present-day Jordan, to join her parents. Her father was directing the British School of Archaeology in Jerusalem.
And she didn't just hang out and sightsee.
No, for over a year, she doesn't just visit, she works. And her primary task is documenting the patterns of Byzantine-era mosaics scattered across the ruins of 5th and 6th century churches.
Which is incredibly tedious work.
Extremely. She creates these hyper-precise, perfectly to-scale drawings of these ancient, fragmented mosaic patterns, while simultaneously, running chemical analyses on the individual glass tesserae, the little colored tiles, to figure out how they were manufactured.
It's the absolute crucible of her spatial intelligence. Look at the cognitive mechanism of mapping a mosaic, right?
It's all fragments.
Exactly. You are staring at a floor that has been shattered by earthquakes in time. You have thousands of individual disjointed fragments. You have to measure them exactly, scale them down proportionally onto paper. And suddenly, from the chaos of the fragments, you perceive the overarching geometric pattern.
It's basically a real-world puzzle.
It is. She spent over a year training her visual cortex and her mathematical mind to synthesize a cohesive image from scattered data points. That is exactly what X-ray crystallography is.
Wow. Yeah, you're looking at scattered diffraction spots and deducing a 3-dimensional lattice.
Precisely. Her ability to visualize atomic structures later in life is a direct linear evolution from her time mapping those Byzantine ruins. She was actually so engrossed in the archaeological mapping that she genuinely considered abandoning chemistry entirely.
Wait, really? She almost didn't become a chemist?
Yeah. Yale University actually still holds her scale drawings of those Jerash mosaics in their archives today because they're of such high academic quality.
That is wild. The woman who would eventually map the very atoms of life started by mapping the broken floors of antiquity. But, and this is where it gets infuriating, when she finally resolves to pursue chemistry at Oxford, she hits this massive administrative brick wall.
Ah, yes. The Oxford entry requirements.
Right, because she had been attending a state school, the Sir John Lehman Grammar School. where she had to fight just to be allowed into the chemistry classes in the first place. I mean, she was one of only 2 girls.
Of course.
She excelled, obviously. But Oxford had a rigid, non-negotiable entry requirement. You had to be proficient in Latin, and her state school didn't teach Latin.
It is the epitome of institutional gatekeeping. I mean, Oxford's Latin requirement was a vestige of the medieval university system. It had absolutely no bearing on a student's aptitude for mathematical calculation or spatial reasoning or chemical analysis.
Nothing at all. It was just a hurdle.
Purely a class filter. It ensured that only students from wealthy, private preparatory schools could gate admission. If it hadn't been for her grammar school headmaster, George Watson, who realized he had a generational intellect on his hands.
Thank goodness for him.
Right. He volunteered his own time to give her intensive one-on-one Latin tuition. If he hadn't done that, she would have been rejected.
It really makes you wonder, how many brilliant minds, how many potential Nobel laureates history has just lost simply because they lacked the resources to jump through an entirely arbitrary administrative hoop.
Countless, I'm sure.
But she clears the hurdle. In 1928, she enters Somerville College, Oxford. She absolutely crushes the curriculum and graduates in 1932 with a first-class honors degree in chemistry. She was only the 3rd woman at Oxford to ever achieve that.
Which is an incredible feat in that era.
Huge. And that academic dominance propels her directly to Cambridge for her PhD. And this is where she steps into the laboratory of John Desmond Bernal.
Yes. Bernal is a central pillar in the architecture of Dorothy's life. He went by the nickname Sage, and he was a brilliant, highly controversial figure.
Sage. That's quite a nickname to live up to.
He managed it, apparently. He was an outspoken Marxist, deeply involved in the Communist Party, and later a key scientific advisor to the UK government. But crucially for Dorothy, Bernal's laboratory was an anomaly in 1930s academia.
How so? Because Cambridge was pretty much an exclusive gentleman's club at that point, right?
Exactly. Women, if they were present at all, were completely marginalized. They were often restricted to rote calculation or just secretarial duties. But Bernal despised that hierarchy. He operated his lab on strict egalitarian principles.
So he actually let her do the real work.
He recognized Dorothy's genius immediately and treated her as a true peer. She was encouraged to operate the advanced equipment, lead her own lines of inquiry, and really push the boundaries of their techniques.
And together, they achieved a massive first. They decided to apply X-ray crystallography, which up to that point had mostly been used on simple things like minerals and salts, to a biological substance.
A huge leap.
Yeah, they targeted pepsin, which is an enzyme in the stomach that breaks down proteins. Now, the historical record surrounding this discovery is super fascinating to me, because Dorothy always insisted on crediting Bernal.
Right, she always downplayed her own role.
She would publicly state that he took the initial photographs and provided the crucial first insights. But when you look at the actual day-to-day progression of that pepsin experiment, she was the one driving the rigorous, exhausting mathematical analysis that proved the structure.
Her deference to Bernal is a really complex dynamic. She was genuinely humble, of course. But we also have to view it through the lens of a young female scientist navigating a deeply patriarchal field.
She probably felt she had to credit the established male figure.
There's definitely that element. But she also respected him immensely. Beyond the science, their relationship was intensely intimate. They were lovers before she eventually met her husband. And Bernal's influence permeated every facet of her identity.
So it wasn't just professional.
Not at all.
Really?
He didn't just teach her advanced crystallography. He solidified her political worldview. He instilled in her the belief that scientific advancement shouldn't just be an abstract academic exercise. It had to be harnessed for the tangible betterment of society.
Which ties right into their shared left-wing ideals.
Exactly. He provided an intellectual and personal sanctuary where she could operate without the suffocating societal restrictions of the era.
So, equipped with that profound mentorship and an absolute mastery of this revolutionary X-ray technique, Dorothy returns to Oxford in 1934. She secures a research fellowship and starts building her own laboratory.
Things are really looking up.
Yeah, by 1936, Somerville College appoints her as its first fellow and tutor in chemistry. She's 24 years old, her career is in a vertical climb, and she is poised to just take over the field. And then her body betrays her.
The onset was sudden and just brutal. Shortly after returning to Oxford, she developed severe, unrelenting pain in her hands.
At 24.
At 24. The joints began to swell aggressively, followed by early signs of distortion. The diagnosis was rheumatoid arthritis. For an experimental chemist, this is practically a death sentence for their career.
Because crystallography is intensely physical work.
Right.
Highly physical. It requires immense manual dexterity to mount microscopic crystals onto tiny glass capillaries. You have to make millimeter adjustments to the heavy brass dials of the X-ray cameras, and you have to draft microscopic, precise molecular maps by hand.
And she sought out treatments, obviously, during thermal baths and even gold injection therapy.
Oh, the gold injections. That was the standard, albeit highly toxic, medical intervention at the time. Yikes. But the disease was relentless. It progressed into her feet, causing deformities that made walking agonizing and locked her hands into permanent, painful contortions. But she refused to leave the lab.
Never.
This brings us back to that image from the beginning. Her strapping, elongated levers to the dials of her equipment. As her physical capacity diminished, her scientific ambition seemed to exponentially expand.
It's a staggering contrast.
Right. And then, in 1937, she marries Thomas Lionel Hodgkin. He was an intermittent communist and historian who later becomes a leading scholar of African politics. And they go on to have 3 children.
So she's balancing a lot.
To say the least, we are looking at a woman who is raising a family, managing a household, battling chronic, crippling pain, and simultaneously taking on the most formidable chemical structures known to humanity. And then the outbreak of World War II dictates her next major target.
The war fundamentally shifted the priorities of the entire global scientific community. Abstract research was sidelined in favor of immediate survival. On the battlefields, soldiers weren't just dying from bullets and shrapnel.
No, it was the infections.
They were dying from secondary bacterial infections. Sepsis was devastating the ranks. Now, penicillin had been discovered by Alexander Fleming years earlier, but no one knew how to mass produce it.
It was just mold juice, basically, at that point.
Exactly. It was incredibly difficult to isolate and purify. To synthesize it on an industrial scale, chemists needed to know exactly how its atoms were arranged. They needed the blueprint.
And the leading chemical theorists of the time were dead wrong about what that blueprint looked like.
Completely wrong.
The consensus among the world's top chemists was that penicillin had a specific, stable structure. But when Dorothy and her team, which included the brilliant biochemist Barbara Lowe, when they started bouncing X-rays off purified penicillin crystals in the early 1940s, the dots on the wall were telling a completely different story.
The data didn't match the theory.
Not at all. By 1945, her mathematical models proved that penicillin contains something called a beta-lactam ring.
And to understand the magnitude of this, we really need to look at why the established chemists thought she was crazy.
Please explain, because this chemical geometry stuff is wild.
Right. A beta-lactam ring is a molecular structure consisting of 3 carbon atoms and 1 nitrogen atom arranged in a square. In the laws of chemical geometry, atoms want to bond at comfortable, stable angles, typically around 109.5 degrees.
Okay, they like their space.
They do. If you force them into a rigid 90-degree square ring, you create massive physical strain. The chemical bonds are essentially stretched and bent to their breaking point. Theoretical chemists argued that such a highly strained, unstable ring could not possibly exist in a stable drug molecule.
They thought it would just pop open.
Exactly. They said it would simply snap open.
But Hodgkin didn't care what the theory dictated. The X-ray diffraction patterns provided empirical physical proof. She mapped the electron densities and basically said, the atoms are right here, I am looking at them.
Your math doesn't lie.
And ironically, that massive chemical tension, that instability that everyone thought was impossible, is the exact mechanism that makes penicillin work.
This is the best part.
Right. When penicillin encounters a bacterium, that highly strained beta-lactam ring acts like a loaded mousetrap. It snaps open, binds to the proteins the bacteria use to build their cell walls, and destroys them. The bacteria literally burst open.
Boom. Her discovery not only proved the skeptics wrong, but it explained the exact lethal mechanism of the drug.
Furthermore, deciphering that structure allowed chemists to finally understand how to modify it. Once you know the blueprint, you can tweak the molecule to create new, synthetic variants of penicillin that can resist bacterial mutations.
It was a true watershed moment in modern medicine.
It really was. But I keep returning to the physical reality of how she proved this, because she didn't have 3D modeling software on a computer.
Oh, no, not at all.
She was creating physical models of the electron density using contour maps. She would calculate exactly where the electrons were thickest around each atom, draw those contours onto clear sheets of glass or plastic, kind of like a topographical map of a mountain range.
Right, tracing the peaks and valleys.
Exactly. And then she would physically stack these heavy plates on top of each other in a wooden frame to build a 3-dimensional model of the molecule.
You were talking about hundreds of meticulous hand-drawn calculations transferred to physical media and stacked with millimeter precision.
Exactly. And doing that with hands crippled by arthritis must have been pure torture. It actually makes me wonder about the neuroplasticity involved here.
What do you mean?
Well, when someone loses their sight, their auditory processing often becomes heightened to compensate.
Sure.
If you are Dorothy Marchkin and your hands are failing you, if the simple act of adjusting a physical model is exhausting and painful, does your brain compensate? Did her physical limitations force her to hold more of the complexity in her working memory?
Oh, I see.
Did she have to perfect the three-dimensional structures entirely in her mind's eye before committing them to the physical world, simply because she couldn't afford the physical energy of trial and error?
It is a really compelling hypothesis. We know she already possessed exceptional spatial awareness from her days mapping the mosaics in Jerash, but the restriction of her physical mobility likely necessitated an expansion of her internal visualization.
Like her brain became the computer.
Exactly. She had to become an unparalleled rendering engine. She couldn't constantly tinker with physical atomic models the way a fully able-bodied chemist might. She had to rely on sheer intellectual certainty. The pain demanded absolute precision of thought. Her physical confinement forced her intellect to operate on a level that her peers couldn't even fathom.
And she needed every ounce of that visualization power for her next challenge. Penicillin proved her technique was flawless, but in 1948, she takes on a molecule that makes penicillin look like child's play. We are talking about vitamin B12.
Oh, B12 is an absolute behemoth.
Huge.
The pharmaceutical company Merck had recently isolated it. It is an essential molecule. I mean, the human body needs it for brain function, DNA synthesis, red blood cell formation. A deficiency leads to pernicious anemia, which was historically a fatal condition.
So the stakes are incredibly high.
Very high. Merck had managed to crystallize B12, but they had absolutely no idea what the chemical structure was. The only data they published were its refractive indices, basically, how light bent when it passed through the crystal.
Which, for a structural chemist, is practically useless.
Completely useless.
It's like someone handing you a tiny piece of tinted glass and asking you to reverse engineer the entire engine, chassis, and electrical system of a commercial airliner.
Great analogy.
Because B12 is vastly larger than penicillin, and crucially, it was a black box. In crystallography, it helps immensely if you have a rough idea of what atoms are inside, so you can make an educated guess at the structure and refine it against your X-ray data. But with B12,
They had nothing.
aside from knowing it contained a heavy atom of cobalt, they were flying completely blind. No one had ever attempted to solve a molecule of this size from scratch.
And this is where Hodgkin's observational brilliance truly shines. She receives these crystals from Merck, and before she even mounts them in the X-ray camera, she just examines them under a standard microscope. And she observes that the crystals are pleochroic.
Okay, pause. Pleochroic meaning what exactly?
Pleochroism is an optical phenomenon where a substance appears to be different colors, depending on the angle from which you view it.
Like those color-shifting car paint jobs.
Exactly like that. Now, why does that happen at a molecular level? It happens because the electron clouds inside the crystal are absorbing different wavelengths of light depending on their physical orientation.
Okay.
When Hodgkin sees this color shift, she immediately deduces the underlying molecular architecture. She realizes that for the electrons to absorb light in this highly directional way, there must be a massive, flat, ring-like structure sitting at the core of the molecule.
Just from looking at the color.
Just by looking at how the crystal interacts with ambient light.
Okay.
She identifies a planar porphyrin-like ring before taking a single X-ray measurement.
That is staggering. Just pure intuition based on observation. But deducing a flat ring is one thing. Plotting the exact coordinates of over 100 individual atoms is another. How did she solve the rest of the black box?
She utilized a technique heavily reliant on that single cobalt atom we mentioned. It is known as the heavy atom method.
Okay, how does that work?
Because cobalt is massive compared to the surrounding carbon and nitrogen atoms, its dense electron cloud scatters X-rays much more powerfully. Amidst the chaotic sea of scattered waves captured on the film, the signal from the cobalt atom acts as a lighthouse.
A bright spot in the noise.
Right. By locating the exact position of that heavy cobalt anchor, she could calculate the phase of its scattered waves. Once you have the phase of one heavy atom, you can use it as a reference point to start mathematically deciphering the phases of the much weaker waves scattered by the lighter atoms surrounding it.
That sounds tedious.
It is an agonizing iterative process. You calculate a rough map, find a few more atoms, plug those new atoms back into the equation, and run the whole calculation again to get a slightly clearer map.
I mean, it took her team almost 8 years of relentless mathematical grinding. But in 1955, and finalizing the details in 1956, she published the complete three-dimensional atomic structure of vitamin B12.
And the reaction from the scientific community was just pure shock.
Lawrence Bragg, the son of the man whose book she read at 16 and a Nobel laureate himself, publicly stated that Hodgkin's B12 discovery was as significant to science as breaking the sound barrier.
Wow.
She proved that X-ray crystallography wasn't just a verification tool for simple molecules. It was a master key that could unlock the most opaque, complex architectures of biology.
And that achievement secured her the 1964 Nobel Prize in Chemistry. She was the third woman in history to win the chemistry prize, following Marie Curie and Irene Joliot-Curie.
Which is amazing, but there is a really telling detail regarding her public identity during this era that I think speaks to the friction she constantly navigated.
Oh, about her name.
Yeah. Up until 1949, she published all of her groundbreaking work, the early pepsin work, the penicillin triumph under her maiden name, Dorothy Crowfoot. She was even elected as a Fellow of the Royal Society under that name.
Right, establish her entire professional reputation as Crowfoot.
Exactly. This is despite having been married to Thomas Hodgkin since 1937. But then, while contributing a major chapter to a definitive book on penicillin chemistry, her co-author's secretary aggressively pesters her.
The secretary.
Yes, insisting that it is inappropriate for a married woman to publish under her maiden name. Societal pressure forced her hand, and from that point forward, she published as Dorothy Crowfoot Hodgkin.
It is a stark reminder of the cultural gravity she was fighting against. She possessed an intellect that could break the sound barrier of structural chemistry, yet she was still subjected to the mundane, patriarchal conformities of mid-century Britain.
It's so frustrating.
Even the Nobel Committee formally awarded it to her as Dorothy Crowfoot Hodgkin, though the prize case itself just reads Crowfoot Hodgkin. It illustrates how, for women in science, every aspect of their existence, even their own established professional brand, was subject to societal negotiation.
Yeah, she literally had to defend her own name. So she breaks the sound barrier. She reaches the absolute pinnacle with the Nobel Prize. For most scientists, that is the finale. You step back, manage a department, and write memoirs.
Not Dorothy.
No. For Dorothy, the Nobel Prize was merely a mid-career milestone in the middle of a staggering 35-year obsession with a completely different molecule.
Yeah.
We have to talk about insulin.
Yes. The Insulin Project is the definitive testament to her endurance. The timeline is almost unfathomable. It begins way back in 1934 when she first returned to Oxford. A colleague, the chemist Robert Robinson, handed her a tiny crystalline sample of insulin.
Insulin, of course, is the master hormone that regulates how the human body metabolizes carbohydrates, fats, and proteins by controlling glucose absorption.
Essential for life.
Right. When insulin fails, the result is diabetes. The sheer physiological importance of the molecule immediately captured her. She took her first X-ray photograph of an insulin crystal that same year in 1934.
But she doesn't solve it in the 1930s. She doesn't solve it in the 40s or 50s.
Right. She had the physical crystal, she had the X-ray cameras, but she couldn't map the structure. Why? I mean, if she could crack penicillin and B12, why did insulin remain locked away for over 3 decades?
Because insulin is a protein. And proteins are an entirely different order of magnitude and structural complexity. B12 was massive, containing around 180 atoms. Insulin contains nearly 800.
Oh my gosh, 800!
The X-ray diffraction patterns produced by an insulin crystal were overwhelmingly complex. The mathematical calculations required to resolve those patterns rely on Fourier transforms.
Okay, I've heard that term. How do Fourier transforms work in this context?
So imagine sitting in a concert hall listening to a symphony orchestra. Your ear hears a single, massive, complex wave of sound.
So just one big wall of music?
Right. A Fourier transform is the mathematical process of taking that single chaotic wave and breaking it down into every individual frequency, isolating the exact pitch and volume of the oboe, the violins, the cellos, all from that one combined sound.
Okay, I'm tracking.
In crystallography, the scattered X-rays are the symphony. You have thousands of overlapping waves hitting the film. The Fourier transform mathematically untangles them to reveal the exact position of the individual atoms.
Doing that for 800 atoms sounds impossible.
For an 800-atom molecule, doing these calculations by hand or even with early mechanical calculators would literally take a human lifetime. The technological capacity to process that much mathematical data simply did not exist on planet Earth in the 1930s.
So she was effectively a time traveler stuck in the wrong era. She knew exactly what needed to be done. She possessed the blueprint data, but she had to wait for human technology to catch up. And instead of abandoning it, she spent decades refining her techniques, improving the X-ray resolution, and gathering an elite international team of young structural biologists. She patiently waited for the invention of the microchip.
She waited for computers.
Yeah. As computational power finally began to scale up in the 1960s, her team fed those massive data sets into early room-sized computers. And finally, in 1969, 35 years after she took that first photograph, the computer spat out the completed three-dimensional architecture of insulin.
And the impact was immediate and global. By revealing the exact shape of insulin, she handed pharmaceutical companies the master key. They could finally understand how the molecule interacted with cellular receptors.
They could actually mess with it.
Crucially, yes, they could begin to engineer it. By altering specific amino acids in the structure, scientists created synthetic recombinant human insulin that was faster acting or longer lasting, completely revolutionizing the treatment of type 1 and type 2 diabetes.
And what I find so revealing about her character is how she handled that triumph. There was no proprietary hoarding of the data. She didn't lock the structure behind corporate patents.
No, she gave it away.
She immediately traveled the world, giving lectures, sharing the structural coordinates, and actively advising other laboratories on how to utilize the information. Her commitment to the global scientific community was absolute.
That really speaks to who she was.
But that internationalism wasn't restricted to science. It extended deeply into her politics. Which brings us to the Cold War, where her life takes on the tone of an espionage thriller.
It really does. Her political worldview, forged by her mother's anti-war stance and hardened by J.D. Bernal's Marxism, was radically progressive. She was an uncompromising advocate for social equality and nuclear disarmament.
And during the Cold War, that made you a target.
Absolutely. Because her husband Thomas was historically associated with the Communist Party, and because Dorothy herself openly collaborated with scientists in Soviet bloc countries, the United States government viewed her as a severe security threat.
Wait, Dorothy Hodgkin, a security threat?
Yes. During the peak of the McCarthy-era paranoia in 1953, the preeminent structural chemist on the planet was officially banned from entering the United States.
That is just a stunning display of political myopia. The CIA was actively monitoring a woman whose primary life objective was curing human disease simply because she believed that scientific cooperation shouldn't be halted by the Iron Curtain.
It's ridiculous. If she needed to attend a symposium in the U.S. to discuss crystallography, she was forced to apply for a special, temporary waiver from the CIA.
Did it stop her from speaking out?
Not even a little bit. The intimidation tactics failed completely. She leaned further into her activism. She became profoundly vocal about the existential threat of nuclear weapons. This culminated in her serving as the president of the Pugwash Conference from 1976 to 1988.
The Pugwash Conference? What is that exactly?
It's an elite international organization that gathers scholars and public figures to work towards armed conflict reduction. She held the presidency longer than anyone before or since. The Soviet government under Mikhail Gorbachev even awarded her the Lenin Peace Prize in 1987 in recognition of her tireless disarmament efforts.
Which introduces one of the most bizarre and fascinating paradoxes of her life. Let's talk about her relationship with Margaret Thatcher.
Oh, this is a great story.
In the 1940s, Dorothy tutored a young chemistry student at Oxford named Margaret Roberts. That student would go on to become the Iron Lady, the fiercely conservative prime minister who essentially dismantled the British welfare state and pioneered modern conservative economics.
Complete opposites.
Right. Dorothy Hodgkin was a staunch socialist, practically a Marxist, who campaigned for nuclear disarmament. Thatcher was a Cold Warrior who aggressively modernized Britain's nuclear deterrent. They were ideological opposites in every conceivable way. And yet, when Thatcher moved into 10 Downing Street, she hung a portrait of Dorothy Hodgkin in her office.
It is one of the most striking testaments to the sheer force of Hodgkin's intellect. Thatcher, despite her rigid political ideology, maintained a profound respect for empirical rigor, unrelenting hard work, and scientific brilliance qualities she absorbed directly from Hodgkin's laboratory.
She recognized greatness, even if she disagreed with the politics.
Exactly. Thatcher fundamentally disagreed with her tutor's politics, but she recognized that she was in the presence of historical greatness. The visual irony of the conservative prime minister making ruthless economic decisions under the painted gaze of her socialist, peace activist chemistry tutor is Incredible.
It's a great image, but that deep-seated desire to see the best in the international community, to bridge the gap between East and West, also created a massive blind spot for Dorothy. And this leads to the Elena Saiescu hoax.
Yeah, this is the dark side of that idealism.
Dorothy was desperate to foster scientific brotherhood with communist nations, undertaking 8 separate trips to China between 1959 and her death. But in the 1980s, when Dorothy was in her 70s, she wrote a glowing, highly complimentary foreword for the English edition of a polymer chemistry textbook.
Written by Elena Saiescu.
Yes, the listed author was Elena Saiescu, the wife of Nicolae Saiescu, the brutal dictator of Romania. In the foreword, Hodgkin lauded Elena's outstanding achievements and her formidable career as a research chemist.
The tragedy of this endorsement was revealed after the violent Romanian Revolution in 1989. The incoming government exposed the fact that Elena Saiescu was a complete academic fraud.
She wasn't a chemist at all.
She had barely finished primary school. She possessed absolutely no scientific expertise. The textbook that Hodgkin had praised was entirely ghostwritten by a team of captive Romanian scientists who were forced to produce the work so Elena could masquerade on the world stage as an intellectual luminary.
How does a woman whose entire career is based on detecting invisible subatomic truths get utterly conned by a dictator's wife?
It is the fatal flaw of her idealism. Hodgkin believed with absolute conviction that science was a unifying, pure endeavor that transcended political corruption. When the Romanian state presented her with a supposedly brilliant female scientist operating behind the Iron Curtain, Hodgkin desperately wanted it to be true.
She wanted to believe it.
She projected her own genuine, collaborative spirit onto actors who were fundamentally cynical. Her desperate hope for global scientific unity overrode her empirical skepticism. She fell victim to state-sponsored manipulation because she assumed other scientists operated with the same intellectual honesty that she did.
It is a dark chapter, but in a way, it humanizes her. It shows that even a Nobel laureate is susceptible to the human desire for connection and hope. And despite that public embarrassment and despite the unrelenting, agonizing failure of her physical body, her dedication to her community never faltered.
Her final years are a profound display of willpower. The rheumatoid arthritis had ravaged her to the point where she was almost entirely reliant on a wheelchair. Yet her spirit remained completely indomitable.
Right up to the end.
In 1993, at the age of 83, in a state of extreme physical frailty, she shocked her peers and family by making the grueling journey all the way to Beijing to attend the Congress of the International Union of Crystallography.
She traveled across the globe in a wheelchair at 83, just to be in the same room with the scientific community she helped build.
And she was received in China as absolute royalty.
As she should be. That journey took place just a year before she died in July 1994, following a stroke at her home. And the institutional legacy she left behind is just unmatched.
Unparalleled.
She received the Order of Merit in 1965, only the second woman ever to receive it. The Royal Society awarded her the prestigious Copley Medal, making her the first female recipient in its long history. She has been memorialized on Royal Mail stamps. There is an asteroid, asteroid 5422, hurtling through the solar system right now, named Hodgkin in her honor.
And perhaps most fittingly, the Royal Society established the Dorothy Hodgkin Fellowship. It is a specific grant designed for outstanding early career scientists who require highly flexible working conditions due to personal circumstances, whether that is raising young children or battling chronic health issues.
I love that.
It is a direct structural intervention to ensure that brilliant minds aren't forced out of the laboratory by the exact kind of physical and societal barriers she spent her life destroying.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a new framework for looking at the modern medical world. Every single time you swallow a pill or administer an injection, you are relying on a microscopic three-dimensional key sliding perfectly into a microscopic three-dimensional lock inside your cellular machinery.
Beautifully put.
For centuries, humanity was fumbling in the absolute dark, trying to force unseen keys into locks we couldn't comprehend. Dorothy Hodgkin spent her entire adult life enduring agonizing physical deterioration. She strapped crude levers to her failing hands. She pushed past the bureaucratic arrogance of universities that demanded dead languages, and she ignored the skepticism of theoretical chemists who told her she was wrong.
She proved them all wrong.
She absorbed all of that friction so she could give humanity the mathematical glasses required to see those invisible locks and to forge those life-saving keys.
So the next time you are confronted with an overwhelmingly complex, seemingly unsolvable problem, whether that is a massive, chaotic data set in your professional life, a tangled and fractured personal relationship, Or a project that seems to have shattered into 1,000 useless fragments. Remember the invisible chandelier? Think of the scattered tesserae of the Byzantine mosaics in Jerash.
Step back. Quiet the noise. Patiently study the scattered pieces. Trust your ability to recognize the patterns and find the elegant, invisible structure hidden within the chaos.